الحضور الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Smiles for the most compassionate and welcome to the fifth this session will try my own voice. We try to answer questions like why has the Iranian strategy against Israel of using forward defense, i.e. fighting through its proxies, has changed into a direct confrontation, and how the resistance front was disintegrated. I have three speakers with me. We have first of all Mr. Hamidreza Azizi, then Saeed, Shokoohi, and Mohammad, Seyam. I'll first introduce Dr. Hamidreza Azizi. He is a visiting colleague from Berlin, and he obtained his PhD from Tehran University. He lectured at different universities. He focuses on the Middle East, Central Asia, and Iranian foreign policy, and Iranian-Russian relations. طاب صباحكم جميعا.
Be here. Many thanks to Professor Kamrava for giving me this opportunity, and also thanks to the great team at the Arab Center for organizing this event. So when I submitted the abstract for this conference, the original title was Forward Defense in Crisis, and that was of course before the 12-day war. And now, as you can see, I changed the title to the collapse of the forward defense. So the signs of unraveling of this very notion that shaped Iran's national security doctrine for decades was already apparent since the start of the war in Gaza, and then during 2 rounds of tit-for-tat attacks in April and October 2024 with Israel. But then it was the 12-day war that put on full display the weaknesses and the challenges of the forward defense. So let's start by describing what forward defense was actually about. So, and here I think it's it would be good to kind of clear a common misunderstanding that forward defense is usually considered equal to the use of proxies, or whatever we call it, the axis of resistance. But that was only part of that. So the way I frame it, forward defense has been based, because as I will say, there's still no new strategy to replace that. So it has been based on 3 main pillars. The first was strategic depth, in the sense of projecting power into regional theaters, such as Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon, with the aim of preventing threats from reaching Iranian soil. So of course there was always an ideological element to Iran's regional strategy, its policy towards Syria, toward Iraq, and so on. But strictly speaking of the national security and military strategy, which is the focus of this article, this strategic depth was commonly referred to by senior Iranian generals and so on. So there's an abundance of statements regarding this. Maybe the clearest example was the kind of repeated framing when the war in Syria happened, that if we don't fight in Syria, we're going to fight within the Iranian territory in our cities. So that's kind of related to the strategic depths. The second one was what I would call deterrence by delegation. And I hesitate to use the term proxy for all these groups because they're simply not. It's a range, the network that was defined by Iran itself and its allies in the region as the axis of resistance was actually a hybrid network consisting of proxies, of partners, of allies with different levels of agency. But overall, deterrence by delegation was another type of it. Again, another pillar of it. Again, it wasn't only about geopolitics, it wasn't only about security. Ideology played a role here, especially in strengthening those very alliances that I mentioned that form the pillar of the network. But here it is about deterrence. And the third pillar was a range of hybrid tools from missiles, drones, and cyber capabilities, which were designed to be supportive of the other main elements. So these three were connected. Missiles and drones were transferred to allies in the region. Strategic depth was, of course, preserved by those very actors which were active in those fronts, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, in Syria, direct and indirect Iranian role, and in Iraq, of course, some of the more pro-Iran elements of the PMF. Anyway, so what these three elements have in common was that together they formed a kind of asymmetric way of deterrence. So asymmetry is the key to understanding the forward defense, and that's the theoretical framework or conceptual framework, better to say, that I have used in this article. So asymmetric deterrence, of course, in the sense of allowing weaker states to use indirect tools to deter stronger adversaries. So this connection that I mentioned between these three pillars used as that. But, you know, at the heart of asymmetric deterrence strategy, there are some potential contradictions, and those very contradictions in the end resulted in the unraveling of Iranian strategy. For example, when you rely on proxies, not as a kind of, how to say, contingency plan or whatever, but as part of your national security doctrine, there's always the risk of proxy incoherence. There's always the risk of uncoordinated actions by those groups. So that was one of the reasons. Then we have technological inferiority on the Iranian side, especially in light of changing nature of warfare. And, it was, again, fully apparent during the 12-day war, the superiority of Israel and the United States in terms of technology. So what technology does is that in some cases, and again, this happened in the Iranian case, it makes, to a good extent, it makes like strategic depths, for example, in terms of geographic buffer, obsolete. Because you built this whole geographical buffer, but in the end, surveillance tactics, the fighter jets, advanced fighter jets, and so on, they could penetrate. So as we know, this very tendency to work on asymmetry and to turn asymmetry into doctrine had its roots in the Iran-Iraq war, and then this threat perception that was formed during the 8 years of war with Iraq was somehow consolidated. After 2001 and 2003, the US invasions of Afghanistan and the United States. So in a way, Iran started to face itself surrounded by a network of US bases or US alliances all around the region. And that's where asymmetry, the sense of asymmetry comes from, and that's where the tendency to work on asymmetric factors come from. But then another challenge that in the end was destructive to the strategy was that what started as a defensive and deterrent strategy after the Arab Spring started to gradually turn into some sort of an expansionist policy. So strategic depth, extending this geography, it became a goal in itself somehow. And so it contradicted in many cases the very notion of deterrence, in the sense that it resulted in a sort of overextension, especially given the shrinking resources at home due to sanctions, economic pressure, and so on. So what happened during the Gaza war, and especially during the 12-day war? The Gaza war, of course, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that Iran was not aware, at least, of the specifics and timing of the Hamas attack. But what happened afterwards was that this network that Iran had worked a lot to build, the axis of resistance, around the notion of unity of the fronts as a means for a multi-front war against Israel, started to get activated almost immediately, and in different layers. So Hezbollah was the first support front, and then they were backed by the Iraqi militias and the Houthis in the other layer. And Iran was rather confident that, Israel doesn't have the capacity to fight in several fronts at the same time. Of course, it turned out to be wrong. But another misperception that challenged this strategy was that when Iran and Hezbollah, especially these two, because after the killing of Soleimani, Nasrallah played a key role in the axis. So when they built the so-called joint operations room around the idea of the unity of the fronts, my impression of studying this topic in detail is that they counted a bit too much on institutionalization within the axis, and started to forget about how influential individual figures are within this network. And that was exactly what Israel did as a countermeasure to decapitate the axis. And after some time, by targeting the heads of the axis, from Nasrallah to Abbas Nil Furushan, for example, and the people who were targeted in the Iranian consulate in Damascus and so on, the axis has started to show signs of incoherence. So that was another problem. Then we had the fall of the Assad regime, which was a serious blow to the notion of strategic depth, of course. It cut the connection between Iraq, the so-called land corridor that Iran was hoping to use, not only as a military corridor, by the way, but also as a geo-economic one in the longer term perspective. That also fell. And then came the tit-for-tat attacks. And that's where the most serious challenge started to appear, because in deterrence, you always have this dilemma of conceal versus reveal, right? Asymmetry and this kind of hybrid way of kind of defining your national security strategy. Another feature that they had in common was the sort of strategic ambiguity. So even the missiles that Iran had, as I said, so it was supposed to be a complement of the other factors, and it wasn't supposed to be the only way of fighting the adversary. So strategic depth in challenge, and the axis, deterrence by delegation, also showing signs of incoherence. You need to rely on missiles. By relying on missiles, you conceal what you have. And the adversary starts to adapt. They adapted, and they adapted again after October. And that's where we ended up in the situation of the 12-day war. So I will make it very brief, because I know that I don't have much time. What happened, the key failures, of course, during the war was, first, missile use became compensatory. So the other elements, the other three elements failed. So missile use became, so shift, it was a shift, as I said, from the kind of hybrid way to a single dimensional strategy. Strategic depth eroded not only by the fall of Assad, but also by superior technology. Iran, basically Israeli air power surveillance bypassed Iran's territorial buffers, AI satellite targeting, and so on. This was the second. Third one, as I mentioned, the axis of resistance somehow imploded. Fourth, domestic vulnerabilities were exploited. You know, the depth and scope of Israeli infiltration within the Iranian system couldn't have happened without the economic and social dissatisfaction among the public that made this infiltration. So it wasn't just about technology, it was also about domestic failures, and back to the issue of overextension, as I mentioned. So it backfired at home and backfired drastically. So just to end, as we saw, now all the three main pillars of the forward defense are somehow in question. Strategic depth penetrated and broken. Deterrence by delegation, incoherent and fragmented, and hybrid tools became escalatory and insufficient. And basically what we saw is that a deterrence strategy which was based on both deterrence by punishment and deterrence by denial is now only based on deterrence by punishment and only partial part of the capacity that they had before the start of the war in Gaza. Thank you for your patience, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. شكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hamid wa Azizi. The second intervention will be by Dr. Sorry, my pronunciation is not. He is Secretary General of the institute where he worked, and his attention is focused on the relations with Saudi Arabia, and he'll be talking on a framework for understanding Tehran's perspective on the Middle East turmoil and to how we can understand that. لديك 15 دقيقة تفضل.
Good morning, distinguished guests, and I really appreciate the opportunity. My paper is about operational code, a framework for understanding Tehran's perspective on Middle Eastern turmoil. And the paper is trying to argue that this framework, analytical framework, can come in handy to understand and grasp what is happening in Iran decision-making process, and it can be fruitful in forecasting what is going to happen. Can I control the slide over there? Should I stand there?
No, as you like.
Okay. Israel's surprising attack against Iran, eliminating some key figures in military and deadly blow to Iranian nuclear facilities, surprised many observers and politicians too. But at the same time, Iran's immediate and somehow strong response at that scale surprised many observers too. I believe that mainstream theories or the conventional foreign policy analysis theories failed to understand and explain and forecast Iran's foreign policy. That's why I'm trying to say that this operational code analysis offers a better analytical framework for understanding Iran's foreign policy and forecasting what is. The paper is based on Alexander George's theoretical framework. He believes that leaders act in accordance with a set of philosophical and instrumental beliefs that shape their perceptions of political world, adversaries, threats, efficacy of different strategies. These belief systems are relatively stable and deeply embedded, acting as a cognitive filters through which leaders evaluate threats and opportunities. In this light, foreign policy is not just a reactive or driven by systematic pressure, but a calculated projection of worldview and moral commitments. I have used this theoretical framework to understand what is happening in Iran, especially regarding the country's foreign policy. As you know, the supreme leader in Iran has the final say and final word on key issues in foreign policy. So I have concentrated on the supreme leader's statements, interviews, viewpoints to answer the questions. Alexander George has divided the operational code analysis into two main parts. The first part is philosophical questions. They are 5 questions regarding philosophical ones. What is the essential nature of political life? Second, what are the prospects for realization of one's fundamental values and aspirations in political life? Third, what is the correct strategy for achieving one's goals? Fourth, what is the role of chance and accident in political affairs? And finally, in this part, what is the nature of political opponent? These 5 questions map the leader's worldview and that shapes their perceptions of the political affairs. Then we have instrumental questions, 5 instrumental questions. The first one, what is the best approach for achieving goals? What is the utility of means? Next, how much control can one exert over political outcomes? The next question, what is the role of timing in strategy and tactics? 9, how predictable are political outcomes? And finally, what is the role of risk-taking versus caution in strategy? These questions reveal the deep-seated cognitive map of a leader that uses to interpret threats, allies, opportunities, and strategic timing. Madam Chair, I think regardless of my research question, I should answer Alexander George's 10 questions. So I think I need extra minutes to answer these 10 questions, but I'm going to be short. I have used the qualitative content analysis to extract these codes. You can refer the full paper about what has happened to extract these codes, but I should be brief here. In the first question, philosophical question about the nature of the political life, Iran's supreme leader frames the world of politics basically as a central struggle between opposing value systems, a battle between Islam and global arrogance. And overall, he casts international relations as a struggle between righteous Iran with its divine mission and illegitimate aggressors, evils, terrorist enemies, and so on. By that illegitimate aggressor, he means the United States and allies, especially Israel in the region. The second question about the prospect for realizing fundamental values, he believes that God has guaranteed his help for Iranian nation, this nation will, without doubt, be victorious. I'm trying to be so concise about these issues. You know, the Iran Supreme Leader is completely optimistic about the eventual triumph of Islamic ideals, provided that believers try hard and consistently try for that. So there is a divine promise for realization of the Islamic values. The third question, correct strategy for achieving goals. According to Mr. Khamenei, he clearly advocates a confrontational strategy led by force and deterrent rather than diplomacy. He asserts that Iran, quote, must give a strong response to the evil, despicable terrorist Zionist regime and will show them no mercy, end quote. So in sum, the prevailing strategy is one of confident long-term resistance and ideological struggle premised on moral principles and rather than short-term compromises. Regarding the fourth question, role of chance in decision-making and political affairs, his discourse leaves little room for randomness. He attributes outcomes to divine will and human agency, not to mere chance. And he usually says, quote, this is a divine tradition and there is no doubt about it, unquote. And referring to Israel's recent attack on Iran, he declares, quote, God nullified their plots and draw the people into the field in support of the government, and that victory is a divine promise for those who resist, unquote. These issues show that he has no belief in chance and randomness in political affairs. The next question, the nature of opponents. He clearly believed that he denies the enemy of any rationality and legitimacy and depict them as inherently aggressive and corrupt. Analyzing the US-led Israeli attack against Iran, Khamenei portrays opponents as irrational, malicious, and deceitful. He refers to Israel as a rabid dog, evil, and illegitimate. So the United States is labeled as criminal accomplice, and he stresses that both states act under false pretext and ultimately seeking Iran's surrender. The next part, these were the philosophical questions. The next part, next questions are questions of instrumental beliefs. The first one is the utility of means. According to him, he prefers bold action over timidity, provided it is guided by faith and wisdom. He emphasized a comprehensive toolkit that includes military power, ideological mobilization, and legal warfare. The next question, the next question, have you added that 10 question to my timing? The next question, how much control can one exert over political outcomes? Khamenei's statements reveals he believes in crucial but conditional control. Outcomes respond to human initiative combined with divine will. He doesn't perceive politics as completely predetermined. And by this, he perceives himself a co-author of history alongside divine providence. About the role of timing, in short, he views timing as an advantage. And as he said, Iran is struck at the moment of its choosing and will do so again. Thus, he values both rapid and decisive response when necessary and preparedness that marks such timing possible, rather than passively delay. Regarding the predictability of outcomes, Khamenei projects confidence in predicting the broad trend of events. Given Iran's course, outcomes are reliable. He acts as if world events follow discernible laws. One can count on enemies to behave the same way, and I'm the same way aggression when strong, and on allied movements to advance when supported. This gives him confidence to forecast end games, even though the precise roadmap is not written. The last question about the risk taken. He favors bold risk taken tempered by ideological caution, and the optimal stance in Khamenei's eyes is to be fearless but faithful, advancing Iran's objective courageously but always under the banner of Islamic justice. These questions and answers to these questions can help us to understand what is happening in mindset of this Iran supreme leader. So as far as I'm concerned, I've tried to show that this conceptual framework offers a powerful analytical approach to understand and explain Iran's foreign policy. By answering these 10 questions, a holistic picture of Iran's supreme leader operational code is revealed. So as you know, he sees the world as a zero-sum game, and these operational code emphasizes cultural affinity, ideological resistance, and asymmetrical leverage. In his view, Hezbollah is not just a strategic asset, it is an extension of Iran's revolutionary identity. Operational code reveals that these groups are perceived not merely as tools, but as allies in the metaphorical struggle. I want to summarize my presentation. In sum, Khamenei's operational code explains Tehran's bold, systematically charged, and risk-acceptant responses to Israel and the United States. They are coherent within his belief system that elevates existential struggle, divine providence, and reputational deterrence above narrowly defined material cost-benefit calculations. And based on these operational codes, Iran's future path can be predicted. Iran favors forceful retaliation, and based on these operational code, I think we cannot have a very dramatic change in Iran's foreign policy in the future under his leadership. As far as he is the supreme leader of Iran, we cannot have a rapprochement with Israel, with the United States, I think. And I think this operational code analysis can offer us a coherence in policy and predict what is happening in the future. So the normalization is impossible under his leadership, and the resistance can be seen as a victory for Iran's foreign policy in the region. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you so much. شكرا.
I would like to thank the different speakers for abiding by the time allocated to their different interventions. So the last paper is going to be presented by Dr. Mohammad Seyam, who is a Palestinian researcher residing in Doha, who is specialized in security and conflicts. He's got a PhD in political science from Beirut University, Arab University. So he concentrates on the dimensions of conflict and human aspects. He wrote a book about the rule of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, in addition to a book that was authored under the title Palestinian Education Between Occupation and Resistance. So his paper is going to be entitled as follows: The Limits of Deterrence by Proxy, Iran's Strategic Response to Israel's Regional Confrontation After the 7th of October. Thank you so much, Dr. Aisha. And dear colleagues, I would like to thank the Iranian Studies Unit and the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. I would like to thank them for this very distinctive event. I think this is going to give me a benefit because I'm intending to speak in Arabic. And before delving into the details of this paper, I would like to give a number of methodological observations. The speeding pace of events makes any researcher that aims to be objective and neutral in his or her intake. This shows that does not have a crystal ball, but he is exerting efforts based on the events and incidents and comes up with results or recommendations. And after that, maybe events or incidents or facts may appear that would either prove or disprove what he said from different perspectives. Secondly, when we talk about the level of surprises that have come with the different incidents in the last 2 years, this entails that we have to revisit, reconceptualize the things that used to be taken for granted. These have all fallen in the tests of the reality and the frictions on the ground. Third, I would like to say that we have discovered that our views vis-à-vis many aspects with regard to the axis of resistance, these are things that we have inherited and have not been subjected to real tests in order to know if it is a consolidated, strong kind of axis that can deter the occupying state, or is it a kind of a fragile kind of axis? Facts on the ground have come to prove to us that all the things that we have inherited have proven that they're moving into a different direction altogether. The fourth thing that I would like to talk about, so this is not part of what I wish or would like to have, or part of the whims of a researcher, the will to have the axis of resistance as a stronger kind of axis, deterring axis to the occupying state. But if we look at the data, the analyses and the facts on the ground, this would lead us, if it leads us to something that is contradictory to what the researcher wants, he has to abide by it, irrespective of that result. So we cannot start from a presupposition or from a whim that we would like to see achieved on the ground. So the paper is written in Arabic, but I'm going to present it in Arabic. I would like to talk about the limits of deterrence by proxy. I'm talking particularly about Iran's strategic response to Israel's regional confrontation after the 7th of October. So this paper is going to specifically look into the position of Iran. How did it deal with the shock of the 7th of October? The shock that has emanated from this deluge was not only limited to the occupying state, but also it touched many countries of the world, including Iran. And the research question that we try to find the answers to: how did the leadership in Iran respond to the resistance axis? So this was the title that was given to Iran, whether it is right or wrong, but Iran approved of this kind of title, and it became the head of resistance. So this was the nickname that was given to Iran as head of the resistance. And what are the setbacks that Iran has witnessed in its confrontation with Israel? So I would like to start very briefly with an explanation whereby I would explain the beginning and the establishment of the axis of resistance, and this started with the Islamic Revolution in 1979, where the new leadership in Tehran has established new political principles that are against imperial or Zionist moves. This had paved the way in order to establish the resistance axis and also the accession of a number of Palestinian factions into this axis. Also, we have the establishment of Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon in 1982 after the Israeli invasion of the Lebanese capital, Beirut, and also this expanded during the occupation of Iraq, and also the ability to weave relations of alliance, if not following them, particularly when it comes to Hamas and Jihad. And as a result of that, we have seen this kind of political agreement, irrespective of the differences in sector. So we have the accession of the Houthis in 2014 as well, who have acceded to this kind of access. Iran adopted which a kind of a frontal defense strategy through the proxy forces, and because it is far geographically, but even if it was closer, perhaps it would have still perhaps adopted this strategy in order to avoid any direct confrontation, in order to avoid any direct confrontation. And also the paper would like to slightly talk about and briefly shine light on the position of Iran starting from the 7th of October. So starting from the first position, so Iran commanded the incident. Even the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, normally he would come out to comment about big events after 2 to 3 weeks after the event happens. But when it comes to the case of the 7th of October, he came out after 48 hours. He came out to comment, to support the Aqsa deluge or Tufan al-Aqsa, but the official representatives have denied any association or any knowledge about the incident. And after that, members of the Axis started a number of processes, which is isnad or support, and undertaking a number of steps that are a bit close to the engagement rule or rules of engagement. And this what was described by Hassan Nasrallah as operations of support or support operations. And Iran gave priority to keeping Hezbollah as a power of deterrence, even if this is at the expense of Hamas. So the strategic value of them is beyond the solidarity with Hamas. And this is the problematic, or one of the problematics that the resistance axis faced, is to show the consolidation of this axis and to preserve the assets of deterrence through the different arms distributed in the region. In order for us to respond to the research question, we tried to analyze 5 main axes. We have the Gaza front, we have the resistance factions, including Hamas, we have the Iranian-Israeli direct confrontation, we have the Syrian front, such as Yemen and Iraq. In the Gaza front, it is known to you that the Gaza Strip has become a region that is not viable, and we, as people from Gaza, we live the worst and the most difficult days of our lives since we were born. So the Gaza Strip has become an area where life is no longer possible. Hamas, with its both wings, political and military, and even propagation wings, have been subjected to its greatest blow in its history. We cannot even compare it to the 1993 and 1996 blows after the advent of the Palestinian Authority into Gaza. So there is a statement that is repeatedly said by the loyalists to the movement: a leader goes, a new leader comes to life, and they keep on repeating that. And if one master comes, a new master would come and implement that on the ground. But this is not true all the time. When you lose heavyweight leadership, this can be very difficult indeed, and it's very difficult to have a similar new leadership. So most civilians and infrastructures have been destroyed, in addition to the forced displacements, detention, and hunger, and so on and so forth, in addition to the many heinous crimes that we see live on television. So in general, so the response of Iran vis-a-vis what happened and what is still happening in Gaza, these attempts have failed. Iran failed to deter Israel in order not to destroy Hamas. Iran hoped that the through the different fronts, the ghost of a war can perhaps alleviate the campaign by Israel against Hamas, but this has not happened. And here I would like to talk about the Lebanon front. And we have seen a dramatic collapse of Hezbollah. A large number of the political leadership have been destroyed. Thousands, with no exaggeration, of members of Hezbollah have been targeted through the pager operation, and I can claim that the military intelligence capabilities were not on their own able to inflict such kind of blows. I think that the fact that they deteriorated and also the security lack of strength has also contributed to that, in addition to the fact that there is a lack of consensus when it comes to the principles of the political of Hezbollah. And I have to say that was presented by Hezbollah, talking about the different fiery discourses and also the rockets that have been shown, and also images of the chemical weapons and the arsenal and so on and so forth. And also when the opportunity came to inflict pain on Israel, this was to no avail. So we found at the end of the day that the strongest arm, the Iranian arm, was the first to collapse, and very quickly. And after the increased level of raids that happened, we have seen a ceasefire. And this was on the 27th of November 2024. And since then, the Hezbollah stopped its support to Gaza. And after that, and even prior to the war, and for many, many years, so there has been a direct targeting by Israel to Iran. Even the leader of Hamas was targeted and killed in Iran. And this has shown a great deal of difference when it comes to technological and military differences between both parties. And we had Al-Wa'd al-Sadiq, and after that we had the direct engagement, and then we had Al-Wa'd al-Sadiq number 3. Perhaps Iran, had it had deterrent, perhaps it had deterrent weapons, but the intervention of the US was always in the background of all the incidents that happened. Of course, the Iranians lost the Syrian front after the fall of the Assad regime, and the Iranian loss was military in the first place. We're talking about in excess of 50 bases in Syria, and also they had investments since 2013 until the fall of the regime. We're talking about in excess of $50 billion of investments that simply evaporated. And also they lost the land bridge between both countries, and this has led to the losing this front in Syria. So when we talk about the results, this has led to the deterioration of the reputation, political and also strategic, of Iran. And also it was thought that Iran, that it is an invincible power that has the keys that would defeat Israel and the United States of America, but the developments have destroyed such image to altogether. not only when it comes to the regional allies, but also in the eyes of the world at large. So this has revealed weaknesses of Iran, particularly when it comes to security perspective, and also ease in targeting Iran, and also the failure of the deterrence strategy and the forward strategy. And so regionally speaking, so this doctrine failed a great deal when it comes to the different operation scenes. So this is outside Gaza. So this systematic destruction in Gaza, despite the warnings about the deterrence position of Iran and the media discourse and the high ceiling they have presented and the actual ability to confront on the ground. So when we look at these dynamism, this has led to the dismantlement of the resistance axis. If it is not altogether, it is partially destroyed. And also we have seen the stronger level when it comes to technology and intelligence from the other side. I would like to thank the different speakers for abiding by the time allocated. The papers that have been presented are very, very rich, full of analysis and theories. I have read them, so trying to summarize these papers is going to be very difficult indeed, but I think that they were able to present new ideas, new concepts when it comes to the topical issues of today. Here, I would like to open the floor for the ladies and gentlemen present with us to pose their questions. I would like to start from here. So if you can introduce yourself and if you can be brief in your question to have the opportunity to listen to as many people or have as many questions as possible. نطلب من المتحدث استخدام الميكروفون. السلام عليكم. My name is Ali الصايغ. I would like to thank you very much. إذا أحتاج أن أتحدث باللغة.
To you, Dr. Saeed, thank you for your talk. Thank you for all of your talks. I have a fundamental issue with the framework that you are proposing for us to understand Iranian foreign policy. Yes, I don't think a pure rational model should be applied, nor do I think a constructivist model needs to be applied, but it seems like the framework that you're putting forward seeks to balance between more pragmatic and ideological interests that Iran has, but I think it really fails to actually put forward an understanding of when those values that Khamenei says he is representing are actually applied. In one sense, he says he's against global arrogance, but at the same time, he propped up a very murderous regime in Syria in the form of Bashar al-Assad, which murdered hundreds of thousands of Syrians. He propped up Nouri al-Maliki in Iraq, who also demonized and exacerbated sectarianism in Iraq. He doesn't necessarily respect the agency, I think, of indigenous people of the lands that Iran is trying to exploit, as evidenced by the violent repression of popular uprisings in Lebanon, Iraq, and also the attempt to assassinate the leader of Hashd al-Atabat, which is a faction within al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, for trying to disassociate with the pro-Iran factions of al-Hashd al-Sha'bi. So my question is, how does this framework help us understand when those values are applied and when they're not? You know, we can see it's being applied quite aggressively when it comes to Israel, very justifiably so. But when is it, when it's not applied, I don't think we can depend on your framework to understand why it's not applied, unless we go into the direction of pragmatic self-interest.
شكراً.
So I would like to try to understand how your framework helps explain this discrepancy.
شكرا على هذا السؤال الوجيه. تفضل. استنى لحظة بعد هذا.
Thank you. I want to raise my questions to each speaker. First to Professor Azizi, Hamidreza Azizi. I'm Bayram Sinkaya from Ankara Yıldırım Beyazıt University. In the Iranian deterrence strategy or resistance strategy, what was the role of diplomacy? Or what was the missing point in your assessment in the failure of this deterrence strategy? And I want to raise question on Dr. Shokoohi. Did any change, or is there any change in Iranian decision making after the Israeli attack? So still we can count that it is Khamenei that decides everything. So what has changed in decision making process, and is there any change or signs of change in this worldview or assessment of strategies? And finally, I want to ask to Dr. Seyam about the role of resistance in the Gaza tragedy today. Do you think that it is the failure of Iranian deterrence strategy or resistance that led to the suffer of Gaza, or it is the very existence of this Iranian resistance strategy that led to the destruction in Gaza? Thank you.
Thank you. تفضل دكتور. Yes, the mic is coming.
Thank you, Madam Moderators. Because it's the
Saeed.
first time I take a floor in these sessions, I would like to, on behalf of the Embassy of Iran, express thanks and appreciation from Dr. Kamrava for organizing of this timely session. Regarding to the point that raised by Dr. Shokoohi and other the distinguished panelists, I would like to raise some point, and after the ask question. As you know very well, that according to the Constitution of Islamic Republic of Iran, that started from 152 till 154 in our Constitution, the foreign policy of Islamic Republic of Iran, for example, in Article 152, is based on the rejection of any domination or subjection. Or in Arabic, say, "Inna Allah la yaj'al al-kafirina ala al-muslimina sabila." It means that the foreign policy after this pass of the 4th decade is never ever changed and always continue in this way. It means that if the Iran that is opposite with the hegemonic Islamic theory, or if Iran is opposite with the Israel, the apartheid regime, this is all is based on this principle of foreign policy that is never changed. This is the first point. The second point is that meanwhile, Iran is the founders of the cultural of civilizations, and in 2002 called the Year of the Dialogue Among of Civilization. Meanwhile, Iran also is the founder and the main founder in the United Nations General Assembly, the resolution of the human rights and cultural diversity, because we firmly believe that culture to diversity and respect to the cultural diversity is the only way to reach the peace and mutual understanding. So this policy also is continuing until today. And the third point is that—
And the final one.
The last but not least, the last one is that the international system, it is not that controlled or managed by ethics or by moral. So if our supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, that resistance on the only way for the opposite with this, the international economic or international order is based on of this reality that I explained, that rooted in our constitution. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your insights. We will take 2 more questions, and the gentleman in the back, please, and gentleman next to him after that. And then we'll come back for your question, for your answers.
محمود العيل.
أقصى القاعة محمود العلم من مركز العربي. My question is to Dr. Mohammad Seyam. Your paper is a strong paper, and as a person that adopts the idea of confrontation with Israel, he finds it painful, irrespective of the fact that it is a realistic one. I have a two-fold question. What has Israel lost as a result of this confrontation, strategically speaking? And when it comes to this particular phase, I think it is too early to see the future of the resistance axis after we have seen the end of this war in Gaza. So how do you see the future of the axis of resistance? How do you see it? نعم تفضل. There is an opportunity for one additional question, or should we stop here? I think we're going to stop here. إذن بالعودة إليك لدي
Sure. Thank you for your question. Of course, it's important. I mean, the role of diplomacy, and I'm sure you know this debate in Iran, the dichotomy between battlefield and diplomacy, which came to the mainstream actually after former Foreign Minister Mohammad Jawad Zarif had an interview, leaked interview actually, in which he complained about diplomacy being overshadowed by the battlefield and foreign ministry by the Quds Force somehow. So it started to be a debate. But at the end of the day, you know, I think when it comes to the region, the role of Iranian foreign ministry has never been kind of as important as the considerations and the role of the IRGC and the military establishment, as I mentioned. So I described and explained forward defense purely from a military lens, but you can apply the same framework to the overall Iranian regional strategy, and it works. So these three pillars, which were supposed to provide deterrence to Iran, they were the ones that started to define the overall regional policy. And the changes actually that started later in the past few years somehow, I mean, at least this is something that I can see some experts in Iran, some circles in Iran are saying, criticizing things like diplomatic rapprochement with Saudi Arabia in terms of tying Iran's hands in, you know, kind of how far they can go to escalate in order to de-escalate in the region. Look, when we speak about the asymmetry, as I mentioned, it was driven by a threat perception of the United States and its allies. And if you go a little bit deep into the Iranian narrative, it was only, I mean, Gulf states, for example, Saudi Arabia, others, Israel, were all perceived as proxies, quote unquote, of the United States. In the past few years, there started to be a change in perception on the Iranian side, and that was driven by changes at the international system, I would say. And the growing activism of actors like Saudi Arabia and others, especially in light of the war in Ukraine, how they positioned themselves, the policy of hedging, and it started to change Iranian perception as well. That was the reason they started to realize that this policy of indiscriminately you know, looking at all these countries as enemies doesn't work. They started the diplomatic rapprochement, but automatically, because these two were quite connected, regional policy and military strategy, it started to backfire on military strategy. And there wasn't enough time, I would say, to find a solution for that before the October 7 war happened. So that's the way I could frame it.
Thank you very much for the questions. First of all, let me make it clear that I'm a university academic researcher. I'm trying to figure out which one of these analytical tools and frameworks can help us to understand what is happening in Iran. Because these theories are a posteriori, whatever, which one of these theories we use to explain, for example, Iran's foreign policy, United States foreign policy. You can accuse the theory and the researcher that you have sometimes maybe you are trying to justify what has happened there and there. But as you know, any theory, it is the nature of a theory to have some defections, some problems in explaining some parts of what is happening in the real world. Maybe, yes, maybe there are some problems with this analytical framework I discussed here, but I think it is much better in explaining Iran's foreign policy in the region. And at the same time, I think as you mentioned, constructivist theories, I think the ontological security framework is also another helpful theoretical framework to understand Iran's foreign policy. Coming to, as you mentioned, the atrocities committed by the Bashar al-Assad in the region, or crimes of what has happened in Iran, Yemen, Lebanon. I think it is not inconsistent with the theoretical framework because as the first one, as the first question, the philosophy of political life. And as mentioned, what is happening in the mind of Iran's supreme leader? He sees the world as the eternal battleground between evil and the good. And Iran, for example, according to him, Iran resembles the good and khair, and the United States is resembling the shar. So whoever is against those shar countries, states, he is with us, and we're going to support it, okay? By mean, we, not me, the country. So I think these are not, I think these are justifiable by the conceptual framework because he sees the world as, you know, dichotomy between good and evil. And who is against the evil? He is with us, and Iran, for example, or he is going to support him, regardless of what is happening inside that country. Coming to Dr. Sinkaya's question about any change in decision making after the war, I think inside the country there are some changes, yes, in domestic policies, but about the region and its foreign policy in the region, what has happened after the war has strengthened their narration. You see, we told you that if you won't stop Israel at the border, at its borders, it will fight with you in your territory. So it has strengthened the government's narration, what has happened. And another discernible change in Iran's foreign policy is that it's an opportunity to reverse what was going on in these years, the rapprochement with Israel by the Arabian countries in the region. So this is the opportunity for Iran to reverse the path and to replace Israel as the main cause of the chaotic, what is happening in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. The last chance for answering.
بالمنطقة السؤال الأخير رجاء أو عفوا المداخلة الأخيرة. I have two questions about the role of resistance. Do you think this has to do with the failure of the forward strategy? I do not think so. It is not the resistance, nor Hezbollah, nor Iran, nor the Axis forces are behind the destruction and the suffering in Gaza. The direct reason is the barbaric move of Israel and also the support by the US. But what I would like to say, had they meticulously measured the size of the battle, perhaps they would have been much more ready to make sacrifices for the continuation of the axis of resistance. Hezbollah, you're targeted, you're killed, your leader is killed, the vice leader or deputy leader is also targeted, thousands of your soldiers are killed. Why do you abide by the rules of engagement from one side, while you can painfully target the other side? So Iran also, you've entered many wars, and Israel openly says that I would like to target, I would like to destroy, I would like to topple the regime, and you still fight with a trembling hand. But at the end of the day, it is not the resistance nor the axis of resistance that are behind the suffering happening in Gaza. No. My question is to Mr. Mahmoud. What has Israel lost in this confrontation with the axis of resistance? They have lost a great deal. They have. And the biggest loss when it comes to the occupation state, in addition to economic losses, huge losses, military, and so on and so forth, and even when it comes to the political and diplomatic dimensions, the biggest loss is that they have lost the narrative, the narrative that is no longer believed, and also their reputation. Israel, for many, many people, is a barbaric country that kills women and children. And when it comes to the future of the axis of resistance, you asked me how do I see the future of the axis of resistance. Unfortunately, I do not see any good tidings with regard to the axis of resistance, particularly in the near future, because the situation is getting dire continuously in Lebanon. So, God forbid, we might reach a stage of infighting or a civil war. Israel and the US insist to continue when it comes to the situation with Hezbollah. Hamas movement, as we can see, in a very difficult and dire situation on all levels. But this does not mean that the resistance is going to end. Resistance has subdued huge losses, and we can say it was defeated, but it is going to rise and stand up again. مع هذا التفاهم.
We close the session, the first session for today, and I would like to call on you to join me in thanking the three panelists, Dr. Hamidreza Azizi, Dr. Saeed Shokoohi, ودكتور محمد سيام. شكرا لكم جميعا والمتتبعين عبر وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي. والآن
So now we moved and go for a lunch break.